Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
The novel Sun Over the City finally got the recognition it deserved. It was printed in a fairly large circulation, and it did not lie dead weight on the store shelves, as it used to be with other Hunter books. The novel was bought up like hotcakes. Even one director, young but promising, signed a contract with Hunter for screen adaptation. For the first time in the past year, the writer who had become famous breathed fully, filled with pride in himself. A corner of his mind, he realized that the success of the novel, by and large, was a kind of gift from his publisher. On his own initiative, decided to invest in a PR campaign to the full program. Such generosity was a consequence of tragic events in the life of Hunter Wilson. Exactly 1 year ago, his wife Margaret died in a car accident. The publisher wanted to cheer up Hunter, who for 6 months has completely shrunk and stopped writing, locking himself away from everyone in his house. And guess what? As soon as the novel was talked about from all irons, Hunter resurrected and became the same. Yes, he understood all this, but these thoughts internally corrupted him. He needed no favors. Hunter was almost convinced that Sun Over the City, and without all this charity, could have won the hearts of his readers. It just so happened to be the case. In fact, the money that the publisher had spent on advertising could have been invested earlier. Surely, it is common for the publishing business money, just earlier that he was greedy, not believing in his talent and afraid of losing losses. Another 6 months passed. Passions about his novel have somewhat subsided. Hastily filmed and released on the big screens, the movie. Basically, let's face it, it failed. The costs of its production were, of course, paid off. Even the profit of pennies turned out, but Hunter himself was able to watch only the first 20 minutes of the tape. Spit and vowed never to get involved with young, even if promising directors. Publisher hustled on the wave of fading success, needed at all costs. A new novel, even average now, could be well sold. Hunter began to break, at first by hints, then persuasion, and finally, demands that was quite logical, based on the clauses of the contract signed with the publisher in the next 5 years to give out on the mountain at least a novel a year. The advance payment was given to him, and it was just a matter of taking a pen and paper and sitting down at his desk. Hunter couldn't type on the computer because he didn't have enough speed. His fingers couldn't keep up with the heated thought. At first he wrote on paper and gave 15-20 pages to his secretary, and the case in such a tandem got along quickly. But this time Hunter's thought barely moved, and he didn't want to see anyone near him, so he decided to write electronically. At times, mysticism became a trend. This summer, sales of a thriller with the presence of the otherworldly showed good sales, and the next book the publisher ordered Hunter in this genre. But this is not quite his niche. He could write good detectives. Even fiction turned out quite tolerable. But to pure mysticism, such he never wrote, but in the end, thought Hunter, it is not important what to write about, and it is important as he will write. In his head formed a plot about poltergeist, which pursued one unfortunate family wherever it did not escape from him. At the same time, all those who tried to help this family, uncleanness also began to harass. So in the end, those who wanted to get involved in the affairs of the family, there was no one left at all, and between its members increased strife, nerves, resources were exhausted so much that it was time to go begging. But somehow one day, no, one beautiful night, and Hunter couldn't think of anything else. The finale should be grandiose, unpredictable, and partly returning the reader from fantasy to reality. But already the first chapter immediately went wrong. 5 variants of the beginning were mercilessly erased and deleted even from the trash. The publisher began to inquire about the progress of the work twice a week. It was the beginning of July, and summer would slip away along with the current trend. Autograph sessions still had to be arranged. Acquaintances and strangers alike continued to take notes on social media and snip phones. Hunter didn't have time to get his own literary agent to handle these kinds of problems. He began to tire of success. Sensing his impending failure, something had to be done, and he decided to hide from the public eye. With the money accumulated in his work, he bought a house in some wilderness, warned everyone not to dare to touch him, at least in the next 2 months, and left, taking with him only bedding, a laptop, and 3 cases of Irish beer. Arriving at the place where he was met by the real estate agent who had handled the deal from start to finish, Hunter couldn't believe his eyes. It was that rare occasion when everything looked much better in real life than it did in the photos. The house was beautiful. A road surrounded by coniferous forest led to it from the town, tightly adjoining the steep shore of a huge lake. The shore had no guardrails, and the agent warned that in especially rainy weather, drive carefully because you could slip and fly 15 meters down, right onto the rocks. Not far from Hunter's new home, there was another structure that no one had warned him about before. "I'm going to have neighbors?" He wondered, staring at the agent in bewilderment. "They are almost never here," he reassured him. "They're going to sell the house too. So I assure you, no one will bother you in the next 6 months. They're having problems with the documents. So far, so and so. Are they here now? I didn't see any while I was shopping for you, so I didn't bother you about it. Anyway, it's the quietest place you can find in the area, considering the convenience and beauty of the scenery. It's only 20 kilometers to the city. In good weather, in an hour you can turn back and forth if you need something. Tourists have taken a liking to the opposite shores. There are no available sites for them here. I bought you groceries for a week, as you asked. Everything on the list. Something in the refrigerator, something in the basement. I'll show you around." "Okay, thank you." And this place, let me point out, continued to persuade Hunter agent, is chosen with a perspective just for you. One day you'll be able to buy the neighboring plot, and then there won't be a single obstacle left. You're a famous writer, aren't you? Have you made inquiries yet? Well, you should know your clients by sight. I read your sunshine over the city in a heartbeat. For professional reasons, no offense, Hunter, just out of interest. And how did you like the novel? Objectively. Objective? What's that supposed to mean? Very subtly captured all the details of city life, how the inhabitant of the stone jungle was pulverized, how infantile and suggestible he became, and all this against the background of a detective story. Just brilliant. Wow, Hunter was genuinely impressed. Yes, you'd make an excellent book reviewer. Have you tried blogging? Oh, come on, I mean, it's from the heart. Real estate feeds me. Reading is just a hobby. Let's go inside, shall we? Come on, let's go. After talking all the details over with the agent, Hunter was finally rid of his endless pleasantries and left alone in the house. When the noise of the engine lurking around the corner of the car became silent, Hunter was stunned by a silence like he had never known. Amazing, and it happens. The weather outside was windless, and the bright sun was shining through the dark and mighty spruce and pine trees, which were already slanting toward the west. There were no birds, no creaking of trunks, no rustling of red maples and young oaks that grew near the house. There was only the slight groaning of the floorboards as Hunter walked through the rooms, putting away the linens in the closets and preparing the desk for future work. Even goosebumps sometimes ran down his back from the strange feeling of his own, almost non-existence, as if the world had suddenly lost sight of him and wasn't going to look for him. The small hall turned out to have a fireplace. The agent assured Hunter that it was working. Even a pile of dry wood lay beside it. For the sake of interest, Hunter opened the damper, threw a couple of logs into the hearth, put some newspapers under them, in which the laptop was wrapped, and struck a match. The fire lit quickly, and the draft was excellent. Great! At night he would sit here, working out plots in his mind and sipping an Irish drink. As he sat in the chair by the fireplace, he realized that he was desperately sleepy. The packing, the journey, and the changes had tired him out quite a bit. Having made the bed with new linen, Hunter, without undressing, lay down on top of the blanket, and in a minute he fell into a deep sleep. He was awakened by the shouts coming from outside the house, which were not so loud, but they were clearly audible against the silence. Hunter thought that some unexpected guests had arrived, but he had not given his new address to anyone, precisely to avoid such visits. He got up, went out on the veranda and looked around. There was no one on the front lawn, only his car. The sun had long since set. The stars were burning brightly in the dark sky. Not illuminated here by the glow of the city lights, grasshoppers were chirping in the grass, which had not been heard during the day, and there were those cries again. Only now did he recognize their source. They were coming from the house opposite, from a room on the first floor, in the window of which the reddish light of a lamp was barely visible. Two people were arguing, a woman and a man. Hunter could not make out the words, but the raised tones indicated that the matter was moving toward a fight. That's the last thing we need. The agent claimed that the neighbors were hardly ever here and that he'd never seen them. What an asshole. Yes, his sentimental plans had been invaded by unexpected nuances that would somehow have to be reckoned with. Hunter went back into the house, took a beer out of the refrigerator, sat down at the desk, and opened his laptop. The Dickens family was a very ordinary American family, no better or worse than any other. He wrote and heard it loud and clear. And don't you dare meddle in my life again. I know it was you who killed. Hunter shuddered. From the last words of the phrase, his heart beat fast. The woman had said this on the street, apparently running out of that house. Then there was the sound of a car door slamming shut, the muffled roar of a running engine, and the rustle of tires scattering gravel. Hunter looked at his watch, 1:30. He sat a little by the fireplace with a beer, thinking about something far from the vicissitudes of the planned novel. At 3 o'clock the electronic alarm clock beat, startling him and bringing him back to reality again, having forgotten to turn it off. In the city, Hunter was always up at 3 a.m., while everyone who could disturb him was still asleep. He had until 8 a.m. to jot something down on paper, and at 8 a.m. his secretary would come in and take it away. After the death of his wife, he continued to get up on the alarm clock, inwardly resisting the changed circumstances. He took paper, but except for scribbling crossed-out paragraphs, he could not get anything out. Resistance was useless. It only took away the last strength from the creative process. The secretary Stella also came at first, waited silently for an hour, not wanting to somehow announce her presence, and also quietly disappeared, realizing that there would be no work for her again, and after a month she quit. Although Hunter continued to pay her salary regardless of whether or not she had a workload. The alarm clock kept ringing at 3 o'clock, and Hunter, like a ghost who had lost his memory, habitually sat down at his desk and played the role of a writer until 8 o'clock. The first night in the new place did not bring any special results. 4 pages of confused text, full of stylistic and semantic errors. On the second and third night, the screams from the neighbors only intensified. They lasted from 12 to 4 a.m. and ended the same way. The woman would shout one last catchy phrase, slam the car door, and run off somewhere else. Work on the book stalled again. In the morning after the third sleepless night, Hunter decided to visit the restless couple and have a serious talk with them. After all, he had every right to make his claims against them. The law has not yet been abolished, even if we take into account that on the site of the lake, there were only one neighbor. But when the doorbell rang, no one from the house came out. He tried peering in and knocking on the windows, but they were tightly curtained. The two-story building showed no signs of life. It was also surprising that the car the woman used to leave each time never appeared on the only road leading into town. That road was clearly visible from Hunter's window, but there was no other way for Hunter to leave this forest edge with the two structures anywhere nearby. It was unclear how the car had managed to drive off the property without escaping his attention. Returning back in the evening, he hadn't seen her either. Maybe it had happened during the day while he was asleep. Today he sat out on the veranda until just before sunset on purpose, trying to spot any sign of movement on the neighboring property, but all was quiet, just as it had been the first day he'd been here. There was only the flutter of a curtain in a first-floor window, as if someone had glimpsed a glimpse and then disappeared. At night, however, the same pattern was repeated, the shouting, the clatter of falling chairs, the clinking of dishes. It even seemed that another voice, a child's, had joined the duet. Hunter couldn't take it anymore and called the police. "Captain Jones, is this it? Hello." Trying to speak calmly and evenly began Hunter. "I'd like to report a disturbance. My neighbors have been making a lot of noise for the fourth night in a row. Can you give me the address, please? It's a lake. I don't know the address yet. I've recently settled here, but there are only 2 houses in the whole neighborhood. Mine and those rowdy neighbors. So I know where it is, but do you live in a smaller house or a 2-story? The smaller one, I only have a loft. And the screams are coming from the 2-story. Well, accordingly, there was silence on the other end. Hello?" Hunter said loudly, "Are you still there? Can you hear me?" Yes, I can." "And you were talking to the former owner of the house. About what?" Hunter was a little surprised at the question about anything. "Did he tell you anything about the house? The agent handled the purchase. I only talked to him. And what does that matter?" "I see." Sighing, Captain Jones said, "Understand what?" Hunter was already starting to get annoyed by the strange logic of the conversation. "Are you sure?" In the same vein, continued the captain, "That is not some tourists." "What tourists? This is a private area. There are no tourists here. A woman is arguing with a man, and today I also heard a child's voice. The light is on in the window of the first floor. Why would a tourist go into someone's house and yell at the whole neighborhood?" That's right. The captain agreed. "Okay, we'll figure it out. So you're coming? How are you going to deal with it? Because the neighbors are not there during the day. Right now, we have all the cars involved. There's a little trouble in town. An interception plan has been announced, but don't worry, as soon as we get a chance, we'll take action. And I would still advise you to talk to the former owner of the house." Hunter disconnected the connection and threw the cell phone on the table without even saying goodbye. Some strange captain, after thinking for a while, dialed the agent's number. "Hunter, what's wrong?" The voice in the receiver sounded sleepy and slightly scared. Hunter looked at the clock. It was 2:00 in the morning. Dan completely forgot what time it was now. "Daniel, sorry to wake you up in the middle of the night. I just have one question for you." "Yes. Did you ever speak to the previous owner of this house?" Agent Daniel, he thought about it for a while. No, his kids handled the deed. Is there something wrong with the paperwork? No, there's just a hell of a thing going on with these neighbors. You said they wouldn't bother me, but they're fighting every night, and I can't wait to get back to town. Oh, I'm sorry, Hunter. I've never even seen them, and from what I could tell, it looked like it was supposed to be quiet. Believe me, I in no way meant to mislead you. Why are you asking about the previous owner? No reason. The police told me to talk to him. The police? But that's hardly possible, and they should know better. Why not? You see, Hunter, the previous owner is in a somewhat inadequate state at the moment, in an asylum. A year now, that's why the kids did the deal. It doesn't get any easier by the hour. Hunter said in a low voice. Okay, sorry again for waking you up. Good night. It's nothing, Hunter, it's my job, and you call me if you need anything, at any time as it suits you. I'll try to find out more about the neighbors. At 4 a.m. as it should be, the car engine roared and the neighbor's ghostly car, on an incomprehensible route, swept away. This time the woman shouted, "It will come back to you. Mark my words, it will." Hunter typed this on the laptop screen in large letters. He grinned in a sort of unnatural smile and left for the bedroom. The next night, Hunter, having managed to write 5 more pages of text, closed the laptop and looked at the clock 10 minutes past 1. He took the last bottle of beer out of the fridge and sat down by the fireplace, waiting for a new show in the neighbor's house. But the screams didn't start, and at 2 o'clock it was quiet, and at 3:30. It looked strange already. Hunter went to the window. The lamp on the first floor opposite was not burning either. Had they really gone away? Had the long-awaited peace and freedom? But before he could rejoice at such a thought, he noticed that in the windows of the second floor, light flickered, so could shine only a hand lamp, quickly moving the beam from corner to corner. This time it really could be either tourists or thieves. Should we call the police again? Hunter immediately discarded the idea. Useless. He took a heavy poker from the fireplace and decided to find out what was wrong with those damned neighbors. Normally such boldness was not Hunter's usual characteristic, but this time something made him risk it, something he couldn't explain to himself. The door to the neighbor's house was slightly ajar, and Hunter stepped cautiously inside, lighting the way with his cell phone flashlight. The first floor living room was almost empty, just a table, a huge antique mirror, a leather couch, and 3 chairs. It was all covered with a transparent tall cloth. It didn't look like anyone lived here permanently at all. But maybe the owners had disappeared today because they'd finished moving in, taking all their belongings with them. There was clearly someone walking around on the second floor, the lights still flickering randomly from side to side. Hunter walked up the narrow curving staircase to the left and turned off the flashlight on his phone. The source of the light that had attracted him was in one of the bedrooms. Hunter's heart beat faster and louder. He felt the blood rush to his face, his right hand gripping the handle of the poker to the point of pain. He entered the hallowed room and saw a man from the back, bent over and looking at something on the bed. "Hey!" Hunter's voice sounded so loud that he was startled by it himself. The man straightened up sharply and turned around, blinding Hunter with the beam of the flashlight. "What the hell?" he shouted. "Who are you? Who are you?" Covering his eyes with his palm, Hunter asked, "What do you want in someone else's house?" "Police Officer Clark." He introduced himself. "Are you the owner?" "Drop what's in your hand." When Hunter was able to look at the man, he saw a young man in a police uniform, but there was something not quite right about his official closet, something Hunter couldn't quite understand, but he noted it to himself. "I'm a neighbor," he said. I saw the light and came to see who was snooping around in the middle of the night. It's the third day I've been waiting for you. What's taking so long? What do you mean, waiting? The guy asked me again. I called the station. They said they'd take care of it. You're from the city, aren't you? From the city. But now, Hunter said, the owners have moved out, so it's too late for you. I used to come here a lot, and I've had complaints before. Oh, yeah. Yes, but it's been quiet for a while now. Yeah, I wouldn't say that. Hunter objected. It hasn't been quiet for me lately. Let's go outside, shall we? Let's go outside. They went out on the veranda, and it was already in full bloom outside. The police car in which the officer had come was parked at the far corner of the house. On the way here, Hunter hadn't even noticed it. The officer pushed his cap back and lit a cigarette, letting the smoke drift upward, squinting. Did you see that? He asked, pointing with his hand. The wire broke, so there's no light in the house. Did you have a strong wind the other day? Hunter looked in the direction he was pointing, the cable sagging in the leaves, a black ribbon against the maple trees. There was no wind. Hunter was surprised. Yesterday the lights were still on the first floor. You'd better call an electrician, or you're going to get a short circuit, and if there's a fire, it could get you. And Officer Clark gave Hunter a hard look. All right, I will. Thank you for coming. As they say, always on the lookout. The officer joked, carefully put out his cigarette butt with his shoe, and got into the car. Have a good day. What's your name? Hunter. Have a good day, Hunter. The older model Ford turned around and pulled onto the road. Hunter followed it with his eyes and only at the last moment noticed that on the side of the car in white letters on a blue stripe, it was written not police, but just service. Didn't have time to change it or what? He thought. He grinned to himself and went into the house. That night Hunter dreamed that he was running along a deserted night highway, feeling that his wife was in some kind of trouble, and the faster he ran, the more and more anxiety squeezed his racing heart. He no longer merely felt, but almost knew that it was so, that his wife was in danger. The road became progressively hotter until his bare feet began to sink into the loose asphalt, slowing his movements. Finally, he saw the raging flames of the fire ahead and heard Margaret screaming. She was crying for help and saying, "It will come back to you. Mark my words, it will." Hunter was almost already stuck in one place, unable to move, and there were only 10 meters to the burning car, inside which his wife was thrashing around. He stretched helplessly his hands and tried to say something in response, but his tongue did not obey him, and in front of the car, the secretary Stella and his wife's friend Melissa, with whom Hunter had had a short affair before the wedding, were running around. They were pouring gasoline from a canister, which made the flames grow even stronger, and then there was a deafening explosion, and the hot pieces of the car flew in different directions and, falling from a height, hit the ground unnaturally loudly. Hunter woke up. Someone was banging forcefully on the door. He jumped out of bed, tangled in the blanket that had fallen to the floor, and banged his head on the nightstand, cursing. He got up and, trying to move carefully, went to open the door. When he opened it, determined to scold the knocker for his overzealousness, he found no one at the door. But the knocking had been going on a second ago, hadn't it? The intruder could not have been so quickly out of sight. Hunter went out on the veranda and looked around. No, there was no one anywhere. Was the furious knocking a continuation of the dream? Quite possibly, considering that he had been mentally strained lately, especially on this night. What's a mental workout? To be honest, Hunter was close to a nervous breakdown, though he didn't want to admit it to himself. Hunter walked into the house, went into the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator. Dan, I'm out of beer. We'd have to go into town anyway, for groceries, an electrician, and the police station. Yeah, the police station was the place to go to say a few nice things to them and find out what was wrong with the previous owner of his house. The first thing he did was to stop by the station. The officer on duty wrote down his passport information, issued him a pass, and pointed out the office of Captain Jones, with whom Hunter had talked on the phone the first night. The captain, fortunately, was in attendance. Hunter knocked on the door and entered. "May I?" he asked politely. "Come in," replied the captain. He was a man in his 50s, with a bushy mustache, sparse hair on his head, and eyes that looked surprised all the time. "I'm Hunter. We spoke to you a few days ago on the phone about the noise from the neighbors at the lake house." The captain rolled his bulging eyes as if trying to recall the fact Hunter had mentioned, then closed them and rubbed his eyelids with his fingers. "Sorry," he said. "Intermittent proctosis. I wouldn't wish it on an enemy. It's from varicose veins in the eye socket. That's what the doctor says, but I'll tell you what it's from. All that paperwork you have to go through all day, that's the real cause. So what about your house? That's what I wanted to ask you." A little puzzled, Hunter said. "Right." The captain looked at him again in surprise. "Hunter, the lake house, yes, it was. So did you talk to the former owner?" "No, since that's not possible. He happens to be in a mental institution since some time." "Wow." This time the captain was really surprised. It was to be expected, though. "Why?" "Well, how can I tell you? At one time he also complained about the noise in the neighbor's house. I actually went there myself 4 times, when I was a junior officer. But the thing is, no one's lived in that house for 6 years. How's that?" Now it was Hunter's turn to round his eyes. Like this. The captain splashed his hands. "We all know the story here. It's strange that your agent didn't say anything about it. Although, of course, it has nothing to do with your house. To accuse agents in silence such sensitive information, there is no formal reason. What's the story? Can you explain it to me?" 6 years ago, the captain began. "One Christmas night, there was a tragedy, the reasons for which remain a mystery. The husband shot his wife and young son and hanged himself in his office on the first floor without even leaving a note, as is often the case in such cases. What was the reason for this was never found out. An officer was in charge of the case, but he had no time to investigate it to the end. He himself was killed in the line of duty, apprehending a prisoner who had escaped from the colony." "Wait," Hunter interrupted Captain Hunter. "You said Officer Clark?" "Yes. Does that name mean anything to you? But how is that possible?" "What?" "I saw this officer tonight with a flashlight checking out a neighbor's house." The captain leaned back in his chair and began to move his eyes around again. "I'm afraid," he said after a pause, "that you've been misled by someone. Officer Clark couldn't have been in that house that night. But I talked to him the same way I'm talking to you now, so why would I make anything up? Let's go over the facts again." The captain continued calmly. "No one has lived in that house you're talking about for 6 years. That's one. And Officer Clark hasn't been able to talk to anyone in the last 4 years because the dead can't talk to the living. That's 2. As far as I can see, these facts are irrefutable, and it makes no common sense to dispute them." So Hunter continued, "I'm either crazy or someone is trying to play games with me?" "You said it yourself." With an upward-pointing finger, the captain summarized, "I'd be more inclined to the second option, but I'm sorry, the story with the former owner of your house can confuse anyone, and considering that you, as far as I know, are a writer, You must have an excellent imagination, and the sleep of the mind, as you know, breeds monsters. Again, I'm sorry if my logic seems offensive to you, but I'm an investigator. I have to think in a completely different way than you do." Hunter was in a stupor, his thoughts rushing around in his head, pushing each other apart. Who could have played such a cruel joke on him? And most importantly, for what purpose? He had never had such desperate enemies before. He ruled out his own insanity at once. What does it have to do with being a writer? Can't writers think logically? They can think logically, maybe even better than investigators. The task of a writer, especially if he writes fiction, is to mislead the reader, to give him at the very beginning of false guidelines, so that until the very last page, he could not guess what, in fact, the whole trick of the events described. The writer is above logic, because logic is only a linear tool, and you have to solve systemic problems and dive into parallel connections, and therefore know what each cog in the mechanism of a tangled plot serves. No, he's not crazy. The tragedy that had happened to his wife, of course, had shaken his nerves, but he had come to the lake full of optimism, and the noise in the house was not a figment of his imagination, nor was today's conversation with the late Officer Clark. So Hunter spoke again. "After I called you, you never sent anyone out to the lake?" "No one." The captain shook his head reassuringly. "We're still in a state of emergency, and there's no cars available and no men. What am I supposed to do now?" Hunter waved his hands. "What do you mean?" "If, God forbid, something strange happens again, where should I go besides a psychiatrist? If anything seriously jeopardizes your life, then, of course, call the station. Otherwise, I'm afraid we can't help you. Not because I doubt your judgment, but because resources are limited, and when we get things sorted out, I'll send a man to look at the house if you like, but that won't be for a while." Hunter remembered. "I need to find an electrician somewhere in town. There's a broken wire in that house, hanging from a tree. It could short out." "A wire?" "Don't worry, it won't short out. The house has been blacked out for years." But Hunter wanted to talk about the light on the first floor, but immediately stopped, not wanting to continue the slippery subject. "Do you have any weapons?" Suddenly the captain asked. What kind of weapon?" "For self-defense," Jones clarified. "It could be tourists or treasure hunters snooping around abandoned houses, scare them, if anything." "No, I don't have any weapons." "Then I suggest you get one." Again, closing his eyes, said the captain, "In your situation, think useful. I don't have any documents to buy a weapon." "You at least buy a bat. Some tin cannot so frighten the hooligans as a good baseball bat. We got a store near the station, a gun store. You'll find something suitable. Don't tell them I told you that. Just keep it between us." "All right," Hunter replied and headed for the office. "I'll think about it." "Goodbye. Have a good day," said the captain, and again, as if nothing had happened, stared at his papers. Pensively wandering down the corridor of the station, Hunter noticed something unusual on the wall. Perhaps if he hadn't been so absorbed in his thoughts, he would have passed it by, but something in his subconscious seemed to nudge him and make him look at the wall. It was a board with pictures of people in police uniforms. At the top, in large gold letters, it said, "Our Heroes," and among the pictures, Hunter saw a familiar face. It was Officer Clark. Under the photo in small print, it said that he had died heroically on an operation to apprehend a dangerous criminal, having arrested him, but he himself had been mortally wounded. And yes, that was 4 years ago. It was a hot evening, and it was impossible to stay in the house. Hunter took chairs and 3 bottles of fresh beer to the veranda, sat down and carefully examined the neighbor's house, trying not to miss any movement that could happen there. But everything was quiet. The silence, as on the first day, was deafening. Only somewhere in the distance behind the wall of the forest, the voices of birds were heard too, apparently tired from the mercilessly scorching, all-day sun. Hunter leaned against the chair a bat, purchased in the store, and touched with his fingers its handle, wrapped in rough rubberized tape. The weapons on the counter were available for all tastes: combat, gas, blank charges, electroshock, even bows and crossbows, but all of them required, at least, a medical certificate, and for combat weapons also a hunting ticket. He had to choose a bat, as the captain advised, which was a rather formidable weapon, and unlike the same shocker, noticeable from afar. Hunter tried to imagine the consequences of a blow with this club, looking at not long, rounded at the end spikes, even for such a purchase had to show a passport. The seller carefully wrote down all the data on the receipt and looked at Hunter glumly, as if suspecting him of some evil intention. However, he said nothing in farewell, only nodded his graying head. How stupid it all is. Instead of writing a book, he had to think about who knows what. But it was an interesting situation. No one was able to help him either. Just like that family tormented by the poltergeist he'd conceived the novel about. At least the feeling of desperate helplessness and abandonment he will be able to describe truthfully, based on his fresh and more than real experience. If only Stella, the secretary, would come in the morning again, it would be more cheerful and less disturbing. But where was she now, this Stella? Probably he had forgotten about the unhappy writer, though they had in common not only pages written in small handwriting, but also something hotter. However, I did not want to remember about it, because at the death of his wife, this hot very quickly cooled down then. To hell with it. Just as Hunter thought of Stella, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello, hello, Hunter." A cheerful female voice sounded in the receiver. "Don't you recognize it?" There was something familiar in Hunter's intonation, but the thought of Stella confused him. "It's Melissa." Without waiting for an answer, the woman clarified the situation. "I changed my SIM card, so I'm calling all my old friends to tell them the new number. How are you? I haven't seen you in a while. Have you started writing?" It was Melissa, the late wife's girlfriend, the one with whom Hunter had a fleeting affair just before his wedding. I don't know why, but he was glad to see her, though he tried not to show it. "Yeah, I'm Melissa. In fact, you are like from the past life, while I was depressed. Time stretched slowly, but as if I came to my senses, and as if I woke up in a boat, but I have no weight, and I do not know how and where to go." "Well, I see," Melissa noticed. "Your imagination is all right, so you will live. And you too." Hunter objected. "Back where?" "It's about fantasy," Hunter clarified. "I had an unpleasant conversation with the captain today. He reproached me, as if by the way, for being too imaginative." "What captain?" "Are they still bugging you about the accident?" "No, it's something else." "What happened? Where the hell are you right now? I can hear the desperation in your voice now." "I've been out of town for 2 weeks. I bought a house by the lake, moved in for the summer to write a book." "Oh, come on. And I came by your place just a week ago, kissed your doorstep, and went home. And no one at the publisher's office is wondering where you've disappeared to. How's the book coming along?" Hunter was pleased to hear that not everyone has forgotten about him after all. Fans and acolytes were not counted. These on the wave of success, he will always be needed. One could hear that Melissa was now genuinely interested in him. To be honest, sighed into the tube, Hunter, the answer is negative. Nothing is written, And not because the ideas have dried up. There are ideas, but because my neighbors turned out to be crazy. Yes, and also existing, as the captain hinted, only in my imagination. You've had it rough, Hunter. What bad luck is and how to deal with it. Listen, of course, I will not impose my society on you, but just by the way, in the city it is so stuffy here, I was going just somewhere away from the asphalt to hide. I haven't figured out any special escape routes for myself. Maybe. Isn't that the big lake near the town of Vecta? Yeah, that's it. Hunter confirmed it. We used to compete there once. It's a deep lake, perfect for our sport. So what did you want to say about the trails? Hunter, if you need company, but for 2-3 days, I could make my route right through your dacha. I'm not insisting. It's just your voice, so I suggested it. Inwardly, Hunter was even excited by this suggestion. A close person, and even more so a woman, would be more convenient for him now than ever, but he had to pause before answering, so as not to give Melissa his hasty joy. Come, to hell with the book. I'll have time for it. No, Hunter. Melissa spoke up. I will not distract you from the book. You write as much as you want. I'll go snorkeling and sunbathing, and I'll take care of the household, if you let me, and we'll talk at sunset, and remember our best years. I'll be like a mouse. P. Hunter laughed. Come on, mouse, come on over. From our town to Vecta, about 70 kilometers, and from Vecta to the Lake 20, you'll get there in an hour and a half. I'm waiting. Well then, see you in the ambulance. I'll be on my way. I'm just getting gas. See you later. The thought of Melissa's imminent arrival gave Hunter some confidence and a desire to show some activity. He got up and, taking his bat with him, went to take another look at the neighbor's house before going inside. He checked the perimeter once more, assuming the presence of ghosts. Although it was frightening and popped into his head, he still didn't agree. There had to be a rational explanation for everything. Strange stubbornness for a man writing about poltergeists. But maybe the most stubborn of the nationalists, the most fearful of everything otherworldly and without logical support. So perhaps they protect their sanity from a breakdown. And this time we managed to find something. The low shrubbery, shaggy and killed by wild ivy, at the far corner of the house had one oddity. If in other places maples began immediately behind it, in one between it and the trees there was a space of 4 meters. Hunter crouched down and poked his bat into a tangle of branches, the bat hitting something hard. He pulled the branches apart with his hands, and there it was. Behind the bush was a piece of wooden fence, painted green, and 2 hooks, dressed in hinges on 2 posts, between which there was a distance of 3 meters. Getting it off the hinges was not particularly difficult for Hunter. It was not so heavy due to the fact that the bushes seemed artificial. At first glance, however, it was impossible to distinguish them from the real ones, and Hunter saw a barely traveled road descending the hill on which the house stood and disappearing among the spruce trees. But what did the neighbors need this secret path for? Strange, though it was much easier to accept than a car disappearing into the night without a trace. Determined to find out everything to the end, Hunter followed the road, wanting to find out where it led. The road looped briefly through the woods, and after about 10 minutes of walking, it turned sharply to the right at the lake. So, the main route along the high shore on the left, it never came out, going around the lake in the opposite direction. Everything became clear with this. Now maybe we could find something interesting inside the house as well. In the daylight, the interior did not look so neglected. The furniture tucked away under tulle or plastic sheeting, alternating with objects that were not protected from the dust settling on them. Hunter ran a finger along the antique dresser. Yes, the place hadn't been cleaned in months. In the cramped hallway leading to the dining room, however, an ancient pendulum clock was running smoothly, only 7 minutes behind the correct time. It had been started recently, for the weight on the chain had barely traveled half of its proper distance. In the dining room, Hunter found on the floor a tin bowl of food for an animal, maybe a small dog or a big cat. Drinking water had not had time to evaporate from another bowl, signs of someone's recent presence alternating oddly with desolation. After checking the second floor, Hunter went down to the first floor again and reached the study where the lamp burned at night. He tried to open the door, but it was locked, the only room he couldn't get into, and it was interesting. He kicked the lock as hard as he could, and the door opened. Not a courteous gesture on his part, but he couldn't do otherwise. He was too sore from the trouble he'd been having lately. There weren't many things in the office. A desk, armchairs, and cabinets with books and files along 3 walls. The window was tightly shuttered, and on the desk was the same lamp with the red, Chinese-style shade that had been burning earlier, despite the lack of electricity in the house. Hunter tried to turn it on. No, granted, it didn't work. He strolled along the racks of books, looking at the titles on the spines. Walter Scott, Dostoevsky, Stephen King, books on astrology, a complete mix of genres and tastes of whoever had assembled this collection. And suddenly Hunter Wilson, Sun Over the City. Why is this here? Next to his latest novel were other, earlier novels and short stories, a complete collection such as even he himself did not have. 8 volumes, what a turn! Were the screaming owners of this house among his most loyal fans? Hunter picked up the Sun Over the City and opened the front. Across it, in large, curlicue letters, it said, "Dear Kathy, in kind remembrance from the author." It was his handwriting, his autograph. Apparently, a fan named Kathy not only liked to read it, but also did not miss meetings with readers, of which Hunter had dozens in the last year. Of his acquaintances, he didn't have anyone named Kathy, a name he would surely remember. Suddenly the phone rang, and the book fell out of Hunter's hands. He looked at the screen. It was the agent calling. "Yes, Daniel, hello." "Hunter, good evening." "Good evening. I'm calling about your neighbors. Can you talk now?" "Yes, go ahead. I've managed to find out a few things, if you're still interested." "Sure, I got some details about them too." "Yes, what kind of details?" "Turns out they were fans of mine. At least one of them was. The library I found in the house has my complete works. Can you believe it?" "You broke into the house?" Daniel asked excitedly. "It's not locked, and no one has lived in the house for a long time." "That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about," the agent began. "The owner of the house, one John Parker, as it turned out, he died 6 years ago. I assure you, I knew nothing about that or the tragedy that took place in the house." "Yeah, I'm aware of that." Agent Hunter was reassured, "and I have no beef with you." But more than that, Daniel interrupted him and immediately paused for a moment. How to put it? "You, Hunter, had something to do with that tragedy." "Me?" "Not personally, of course, but indirectly through my books. It's not your fault, of course, but nevertheless. Kathy, John's wife, was an ardent admirer of yours, never missed a meeting, and no publication escaped her notice. She would sometimes ask her husband to fill in for her at an autograph session if she couldn't attend for some reason. She probably fell asleep with your book in her hands. In general, her husband began to suspect that she is looking for with you not only reading contact, but counting on something more." "In what sense?" "In the sense that her husband suspected her of cheating on him." "What the hell is that?" I think, Daniel pointed out, it happens to women, and their idols often go out of their way to meet such fans. I'm sorry, I don't mean you at all, but you do realize that women take literature too personally, transferring the characteristics of their characters onto the author. I don't know what the poor woman's feelings were, but her irrepressible passion for reading led to what happened on Christmas night. A nightmare. I don't want to go into all the details again. I guess if you know something, you know it too. But it takes your imagination to imagine the chain of events that went down like that, Hunter. How did you even find out about this? Talk to the former owner of your house. In the psych ward. That's right. I took the trouble to go and see him. He's not that crazy. I'll tell you that much. He was aware of the whole thing. At one time, he had a very close relationship with the neighbors, but when things got heated between the couple, he didn't want to be friends anymore. I don't know. It seemed to me that he had a thing for Kathy. He spoke of her with a special piety. It was like he had a premonition of this kind of ending. He said that John had been completely insane since the fall and all through the early winter before Christmas. He'd gone off the rails, as they call it. They had a big fight. Kevin from the asylum, the one who lived in your house, even managed to buy the only road into town and forbade John to use it. He had to take a detour to Vecta, across the lake. That's all I've been able to dig up. Very valuable information, said Hunter. Thank you very much, Daniel, for doing this work. Don't mention it, Hunter. I've missed some important details myself, so I'll learn a lesson. And as for the noise you mentioned, the culprits are to be found elsewhere. You understand that the former owners have nothing to do with it, unless by will their house passed to some of the heirs, but in this direction my searches did not yield any results. Here it is necessary to involve some lawyers. Got it. Hunter summarized. Thank you again. If there is anything new, be sure to call me. I will. Hunter put the phone away, picked up the fallen book from the floor, and opened the autographed page again. The story with the neighbors might now be quite complete, if it weren't for one thing, but huge letters throbbed in his head. How could he sign Kathy's book this year? If she and her husband had died 6 years ago, who had been faithfully adding to the collection in the abandoned house all those 6 years anyway? And the screams he heard at night were not hallucinations, a man and a woman arguing, and a baby crying. Clarity, by and large, in the whole affair was not added. Dragging the bat along the ground, Hunter walked back to his house, and it was only as he crossed the road that he noticed the light green Nissan nestled behind his Mazda. On the veranda sat Melissa and smiled. Well, hello there, Ryder, she said cheerfully. Were you hunting a mammoth? How pleasant her voice sounded, in the midst of this ominous evening silence. Hello, friend, he answered, went up to the veranda to the guest and kissed her on the lips. You don't know what mammoths are here sometimes. Your weapons are formidable. Pointing to the bat, Melissa said. That's all I'm supposed to have. Melissa rummaged in her purse and took out a small, shiny gun. I have something too, she said. Jesus, Hunter exclaimed. We got a whole gang here now. What do you need a gun for? Did you think I turned into a maniac and hold hostages in the basement? Melissa laughed. No, it's just that your voice on the phone seemed to me a little frightened. And now I see that I did not just think that. It's not a combat one. It's a starter. I brought it with me from one of the competitions. I don't dive now. My breathing is not the same. But sometimes they call me to judge, so it's my weapon of choice. It makes a hell of a lot of noise, scares even a bear away. Too bad you're not competing anymore, said Hunter. I remember when you could hold your breath for 5 minutes. Has your record been broken yet? Not in the state yet, but in the world I've never even come close. It's fantastic minutes out there. Free divers have been going over 10 minutes for a long time. For me, it's just out of the realm of fantasy. Surprised Hunter. Have they learned to stop the heart like you? That's your trick. I remember it particularly well. Come on. Melissa waved her hand. Where can I get to these tricks now? I'm an old woman. I can't compete with young people now. But I remember you exactly as you are, and you haven't changed a bit, as you were a beauty, and you still are. I must have gotten old. I've gone gray, said Melissa, stroking Hunter's hair. So unusual, but gray hair suits you. Somehow you've grown up even. Why isn't your car in the garage? I went in the garage, but I couldn't get the door open. Is it true that there's a maniac at night? It's filled to the ceiling with old stuff. I couldn't get my hands on the car. Let's go inside. You must be hungry. We'll fix you a light supper. Come on. With Melissa in the house, time passed quickly for Hunter. Even the ghosts seemed frightened by her presence. Not once over the next 7 days, no more disturbing screams, creaks, or the red lamp in the window across the street. Hunter again began waking at 3 a.m., and until 8 a.m., he modeled the paper with an unstoppable stream of plot twists for the novel. He transferred his benevolence even to the most fierce of his heroes, Poltergeist. It turned out that the noisy spirit simply had unrequited feelings for the daughter of a long-suffering family who did not want to play with him and in every way avoided his attention. The spirit even thought of interrupting his ghostly existence from the excess, not divided feelings, and gave the girl a way to get rid of him once and for all. And the girl was about to do it when she suddenly realized that it was wrong, that Poltergeist is just a wild, unbridled creature, longing to be loved and needed, that he also deserves to get the opportunity to go to the side of the world. And well, Hunter himself was surprised at this direction of his thoughts. According to the original plan, the novel was to be a denunciation of human cowardice and duplicity, when the created public good is possible only within the framework of relative well-being, the benefactors themselves, but only a real danger to overstep the personal boundaries of good-hearted citizens, as they immediately grow thorns, detaching themselves from the situation and caring only about themselves. Melissa liked the new plot much better. Between swimming at the lake and cooking lunches, she took over as Stella's secretary, reprinting text from paper onto the monitor screen. She was slow at it, but Hunter was glad she was. The novel was nearing completion, and in any case he had time to send it to the publisher before September, who, to his credit, had stopped bothering him with endless hints of pressing deadlines. But if the paper feelings had come closer to their finale, the real feelings that had settled in this house with Melissa's arrival were only gaining momentum. Their fleeting connection from the past had taken on new colors. They were now both moderately wise, moderately passionate, and moderately able to account for their actions, and there was nothing to prevent their intimacy from being platonic to bodily a few days later. Enough time had passed since the death of Margaret's wife, and Melissa, as far as Hunter could understand, had not had a steady partner in the city since their separation. It seemed to Hunter that things were finally getting better in his life. The appearance of Melissa in the house, he took it as a reward for the recent agony. It was still unclear how, for example, the meeting with the non-existent Officer Clark had come to seem like a dream. Why? His nerves were so tense that he could dream anything and mistake it for reality. He wasn't just thinking about it, he was convincing himself of it, as if he were living in the image of a madman walking along the border separating illusion from reality. People tend to convince themselves that something didn't really happen in their past, or if they did, it was different in some way, with nuances that could justify them. They are not villains or crazy. They have all read children's fairy tales. They know where good and bad are. They are just weak at times, as if weakness justifies any mistake. The doubts, driven to the bottom of his soul, scraped unpleasantly from the creek, giving Hunter a noise in his head, and only when he took paper in his hands and began to write, the noise subsided, giving way to other people's emotions, becoming for 5 hours as if they were his own. On one such morning at 8:30, when Hunter had set his novel down, he went out on the veranda, smiling absent-mindedly and to the end, not believing in the successful completion of his work. The heat, even on the morrow, was unwilling to abate. The windows open in the house did not save from the stuffiness, and the cold beer the body could no longer fit. Hunter went to his favorite chair and saw some postcard, so it seemed to him. Maybe in his heart he was waiting for congratulations from all parts of the country. He took it in his hands, looked at it, and his heart sank into his heels. No, not this again. What the hell? Why now? It can't be like this. It was a photograph of his late wife's car engulfed in flames. A photograph from the scene of the very accident that had divided his life into before and after, and which he had been trying not to think about all this time, trying to scratch out of his memory like he scratched out bad bits of text from a novel. On the back of it, as if written by a 5-year-old child, "Mark my words, he'll be back." Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, his hands trembled, and it felt like it was -40, not +20 outside. Hunter, as if in a dream, went back into the house, took a pair of scissors out of the drawer, and began to angrily cut up the photograph, putting the scraps in a neat pile on the table. Melissa came out of her bedroom and stared at him fearfully for over a minute. "Hunter," a little audibly she said. "Hunter, what's wrong with you? What are you doing? Are you all right?" He looked at her uncomprehendingly, grinned half his face in a smile, and said, "They know everything." "Who do they?" "Know what?" "They know everything," Hunter repeated. "They won't leave me alone." "What do I do, Margaret?" "Hunter, come to your senses. I am Melissa." "What are you talking about? Melissa?" For a second, Hunter's eyes became clear. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, yes, Melissa, I need to." "I'll be right there. Don't go. I'll be right there." And Hunter rushed out of the house, got into his car, pushed the gas pedal to the floor, and sped down the road to town. It seemed to him that the car was going too slowly, as if a whole carload of passengers had been hitched to it from behind, and he had to get there in time. In time for what? Where to? As if someone was calling him, but the name and the place of meeting did not tell him. A wooden sign hung on a chain flashed to the right. A road to the city. Strange. Apparently some joker had ordered it to be installed here. He hadn't noticed it before. He looked in the side mirror and saw the sign again. His thoughts were all jumbled up in his head, all sorts of nonsense that he couldn't handle. No matter how he turned that sign either way, it read like a road to the city, a palindrome. And therefore there was no road that could lead him to a life-saving goal. The target was approaching and distant at the same time. He hit the brakes as hard as he could. The car skidded to the left, the gravel slamming into the bottom of the car. Stop! When the dust cloud cleared, Hunter saw the lake glistening in the sunlight ahead of him. The front wheels froze in centimeters from the cliff. His whole body shuddered with chills. He was seized with horror. Carefully, matching every movement, Hunter shifted into reverse and pulled back onto the road. Then he turned left, into the woods, where there was a slightly visible rut. He drove another 100 meters and stopped. As he struggled to unbuckle his seatbelt, He jumped out of the car, ran to a tree as if the car was about to explode. He crouched down, hiding behind the trunk, took a breath, and immediately fell into his memories, into the pieces of it that had once been carefully kicked out of his head. In the month before Margaret's tragedy, their relationship had deteriorated to the point where it was hard to imagine how these people had once genuinely loved each other. They had not spoken to each other for many days, and his wife had filed for divorce, unable to bear Stella in their house, nor her husband's completely depraved character. His sunshine over the city could not end. He was furious. Everything irritated him. Hysterics followed hysterics. Poor Stella, who had fallen in love with Hunter, was caught between two fires. On the one hand, Margaret's sizzling jealousy, and on the other, the unbridled passion of Hunter, who did not realize reality. It was as if the house had been booby-trapped and was about to blow up. The house that belonged to Margaret, in case of divorce, Hunter would lose everything. He would become a bum for no one. Not yet favored, neither by his publisher nor by the reading public. At that time, he was not yet the Hunter Wilson known at the top of the literary world. He was a nobody. Only the sun over the city could move things forward. Hunter felt it. He knew it, as any relatively talented creator knows everything about his creation before it is finally released. He needed only a month of concentrated work, only a month, but it was as if the monster was devouring the time, leaving him not a minute. Hunter had no car of his own, and he had never learned to drive. Sometimes he used his wife's car when there was an urgent need to go somewhere. That day he was going to the city too, and he didn't even remember now for what purpose. The brakes went bad. He decided not to put it off in a long box and went to a car service. That's where it happened. A stray thought, a fleeting anger that created a monster in his heart. The mechanic looked at the brake system, whistled, and said that fateful phrase. "Another day and you'd be in the morgue for sure." Is it that serious? How much more serious could it be? Answered the mechanic and tapped the wheel with the key. "I'm afraid I can't do it in one day. You come back tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll tell you the exact time and price." Where was he in such a hurry? Completely slipped my mind. Doesn't matter what he's attached to it. What does it matter? He had to admit to himself that the reason for his decision was not the need to go somewhere, but the simple thought that there was no need to fix the brakes now. No need. Hunter was already standing at the bus stop when it hit him. He went back to the service and took the car back, saying he would be back tomorrow, but he never came back. He got home, never got to where he was going, quietly put the car in the garage, and with a sinking heart, sat down to finish the remaining pages. Stella was finishing typing the last of the sheets she had. The work was going well. He was calm. Peace spread over his whole body in a hot spill. He smiled and wrote well, splendidly, and at the same time enjoyed the half-realized premonition, the imminent finale of a difficult head and in his own life. He knew how everything would happen, as if he were watching a movie that had already been released and in which it was now impossible to change a single scene. As if playing his part, he made another scandal in the evening. Stella ran out of the house in tears. Margaret shouted some insults, the most harmless of which was to denounce him as mediocre. He's talentless? Let's see what she says to that, if she can speak at all. Hunter answered Margaret as if with a memorized text, and calmly watched her hatred turn into an uncontrollable outburst devoid of any objective meaning. It was past midnight. She too ran out in tears, got into her car, and drove away into the hazy haze of distant city lights. He knew she would never come back. There was no sign for the road to the city. It was a one-way trip only. That was it. Now he could breathe fully. He admitted it to himself. He was ready to move on. Yes, he'd thought about those Dan breaks. He'd wanted to, but they were just thoughts. Little pulses in his brain running back and forth along the neurons, and nothing more. A wish. How many desires don't a person have? He didn't mess with the breaks. He never even laid a finger on Margaret. He just saw more than the others. But that's why he's a brilliant writer. To be able to see such things, it's his gift from birth. After all, it's her car, and it's up to her to see to its condition. To hell with regret. To hell with doubt. To hell with all those feeble-minded people who made a spectacle of the dead policeman, with the books signed supposedly for Kathy, with the shouting of non-existent neighbors, with the picture of this one at last. He'll sue them too, if he has to, and he'll stomp them into the dirt. Let them try it again, you fools. Hunter came back, didn't explain anything to the confused. In a second, Hunter, who was soaking wet, ran into the house, and at the next flash saw Melissa's body sprawled on the floor in the hall. Looking around and finding no one around, Hunter ran up to her and shook her by the shoulder. "Melissa?" he shouted. "What happened? Are you all right?" There was another flash, and Hunter saw that the woman's head was smashed and lying in a pool of thick blood. "Melissa!" he screamed, but the woman didn't move or respond, and he tried to feel for a pulse on her neck, then on her wrist. Where was it, that pulse? Dan, there was no way he could detect it, but the body was still warm. The light flashed again, and Hunter's hair on his head stirred. Next to Melissa lay his bat, also bloody, and in his right hand, the woman clutched her shiny pistol that she had been bragging about. What was going on here? Why had she gone into this house alone? Why didn't she wake him up? Lightning had already incessantly illuminated the neighborhood. Hunter could now clearly see the whole picture, and just as clearly he realized that Melissa was dead, and next to her was his bat, which her head had been smashed against. We should call the police or an ambulance. Now where do we call? Hunter rushed back to his house, found his cell phone, began to dial the number with trembling fingers, and suddenly froze. What was he doing? What the hell are the police doing? All the evidence points to him. It's his bat, his fingerprints. And this is the house that's been driving him crazy for a long time. Who's gonna believe him after he told us about the ghost of Officer Clark and the ghost killers? Captain Jones would only roll his eyes, convinced that the writer, as he supposed, had driven himself into a frenzy and rattled the unfortunate woman who had risked comforting him. No, and no again. Something else is needed here. Like then? Like then? What about the car? No one suspected. His affair was over. He had a new success waiting for him. You can't just cut everything out of your life. Hunter took Melissa's breathless body in his arms and carried it to the car. Then he went back for the bat and threw it far into the woods. He would sort it out afterwards. Now the main thing was to get rid of the body. The rain was pouring down. Nothing could be seen 5 meters away. Could the real killer be following him right now? Even if he was, he wouldn't be able to see anything unless he risked a face-to-face confrontation, and then he'd have all the anger Hunter had built up inside him. It's a good thing it's raining like this. He can do it fast. He'll come back, clean up the blood in the house. No one will come to visit him in this weather. No one has seen Melissa here either. No one knows she was here, even if she was on her way to see him. So what? She just got caught in a downpour, lost control, and slid off the road into the lake. Daniel had warned her that the road could be dangerous in the rain. It would all look natural. Carefully pressing the gas, the hunter drove to the lake shore. The wipers could not cope with the flow of water. The high beam only reflected from countless drops and blinded his eyes. And in this maelstrom, the stupid sign, "The Road to Town," came into view again. Hunter stopped and got out of the car, already thinking how best to push it down. Suddenly there were lights everywhere, side, front, and back. Bright spotlights flashed and a siren wailed. From the mouthpiece came a loud voice, ominously emphasized by the roll of thunder. "Hunter Wilson, step away from the car and get on your knees, or we will open fire." Captain Jones sat opposite and stared unblinkingly at the wet, from head to toe Hunter. The interrogation room was small, deceptively cozy, but built according to all the rules of the genre. A table with handcuffs, soundproof walls, wide tinted glass, behind which on this side there was nothing to see, but on the other side there was someone standing there, hearing and seeing everything, seeing and hearing all the nonsense Hunter had been talking for half an hour. "Then you insist that you did not kill Melissa?" The captain repeated calmly. "No, I told you. I heard a shot and ran to that house. Why would I kill her? Why would you kill your own wife?" "What?" Hunter exclaimed. This question came out of the blue, like a hammer hitting him on the head. "What are you talking about? What's my wife got to do with it?" "You know what it has to do with her." Jones persisted. "You were wrong to think that the case would be written off as an accident. The investigation has been going on all this time, and there is a witness." "What witness?" "I don't understand you." "You understand everything, Hunter, except maybe one thing. I don't think you realized how close friends Melissa and your wife were. Melissa knew all about your complicated relationship and that you'd driven your wife to hysterics. Margaret went to Melissa's that night, and now you've eliminated a witness." "A fight? Melissa confronted you?" "You lured her into a neighbor's house and hit her over the head with a bat." "No." No, Hunter yelled. "I didn't kill her and she didn't say anything to me." Oui. "Yeah, that's bullshit." "Yes, I may have wanted Margaret dead, and I may have known the brakes were bad, and I may not have wanted them fixed at the service station, and I may have driven away in a bad car, but I had nothing to do with Melissa's death. So maybe you did or knew." "There's a big difference." "Yes, I did. And I had this picture of the accident in my mind, and I wanted it to happen." "Are you satisfied? Is that enough of my confession for you?" "But I didn't kill Melissa. That's crazy." "Yes, Hunter," the captain agreed. Delusions of your disturbed mind. You may not have killed Melissa, but you didn't kill Margaret. The problem is that you yourself ruined the brakes on your wife's car, and you convinced yourself that the brakes were defective through no fault of your own. Especially the car service said they never saw you in their eyes, and on the security cameras, your car was never there. You are a writer. Your inflamed mind has convinced you that you are not guilty of anything, and the brakes you ruined are supposedly an accident. But you screwed up on the most basic of things. You always write everything down in your diary. It's a habit of yours, and Melissa knew it all too well because she was in a relationship with you before you married Margaret. She had a year-long hunch that you were at fault, and she came to us to find out for sure. Melissa was convinced of her rightness when she read your confession in your diary about killing your wife. But now I assure you, you will feel better. You will finally understand yourself. Tomorrow we'll talk to you again. We'll discuss some details. But for now, I ask you to sign a non-departure order. We're reopening the criminal case. You'll have to write your novels behind bars if your guilt is proven in court. You will pardon us for this spectacle with both the house and Melissa, but any murder, as you know from your detectives, must be solved, and the criminal must receive a just punishment." Hunter looked at the captain and did not know what to say to him in reply. Yes, now he really realized what had happened a year ago to his wife. Hunter had convinced himself then that it was for the best if he wrote this scenario for himself. No guilt, no remorse. And he really believed that everything had happened by accident. His brain had simply forgotten that he had self-destructed his wife. But Melissa, what happened to her? And what play was the captain talking about? At that time, there were two people on the other side of the window, Melissa, alive and well, and a young officer who looked a lot like Clark, especially if you looked at him in the dim light. "Congratulations, Melissa," he said quietly. "I thought this show would never end. You shouldn't be a diver, but a movie star. He didn't even think you were just playing a part. Give it up." Finishing her cigarette, Melissa replied, "No one will ever get Margaret back anyway, and the bastard will get out of it one way or another. He became a popular writer. He has connections. Right, officer?" "It's hard to say now," the man shrugged. "Jones will work with him. He knows what he's doing. Thanks for coming to us with your idea. For a captain, it's the last thing on his mind. I'm sure he'll want to retire as a major, but in any case, that writer Hunter Wilson has to answer for the murder of his wife to the fullest, and we'll see how it goes in court.